Hello, everybody, and welcome back for the second of our two lectures this evening. My name is Vittorio Montemaggi. I teach religion and literature here at Notre Dame, and it's a wonderful pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Christian Moevs, Associate Professor of Italian in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures here at Notre Dame. I think it would be fair to say that Christian Moevs is one of the main reasons why we're even able to gather here tonight and this Lent and Easter as a whole to read Dante in response to Francis's invitation to read Dante in conjunction with the Year of Mercy. Christian's book, The Metaphysics of Dante's Comedy, published in 2005, certainly one of the best books on Dante ever written, transformed the way we read Dante and opened up unprecedented possibilities for our study of the poem. Basically, what he shows with unprecedented rigor is that readings of Dante that are not at one and the same time literary, philosophical, theological, and spiritual are not really readings of Dante. And to be able to come together in this series to read Dante really being true to this is really, we owe this possibility in significant measure to Christian's work, which in recent times has really allowed literary scholars and theologians to come together in the study of Dante's poem. As if that weren't enough, Christian also happens to be a life-changing teacher. One of the pleasures for me of working here at Notre Dame is to speak with students about how Christian changes their lives in and through the study of Dante. And really, and you can see not just in what they say, the person lights up when they speak of their classes with Christian. On a personal level, I can confirm that he's also a life-changing mentor. I've learned more from him than from any other colleague and friend about what it means to do the work we do. Another extraordinary Dante scholar has recently written, I think, one of the truest sentences on Dante that I've read. Peter Hawkins, at the end of the prologue of his book, Dante, A Brief History, says that really you've got nothing to lose in reading Dante's comedy other than life as you've known it so far. And I think that's what might be about to happen. Christian.
So Vittorio may have set you up for a crushing disappointment. That what John Cavadini just did, Vittorio and I agree, is, I think, the best 50-minute introduction to reading the Inferno we have ever heard. I mean, that's as good as it gets. So we're all very lucky. And John and I didn't coordinate at all, but I think you'll discover there's all kinds of points of contact between what he has said and what I'm about to say, which maybe gives us hope that the Holy Spirit is at work among us. Whenever two or three gather in his name. Right? This is a wonderful series and a wonderful initiative. A century ago, Father John Zahm bought a great Dante collection that his little school in Indiana couldn't afford, because he said, well, one day Notre Dame is going to be a great research university, and when it becomes that, the study of Dante will have to be central to its work. That collection was the germ of Notre Dame's modern Dante program, and hence also of this series. I think Father Zahm would be very happy. In fact, most of the images I'm going to show you, you can find in our great Dante collection. Now, you may have recognized in my title here the famous perfect prayer of Augustine, already a link in the soliloquies. Deus semper idem noverim me, noverim te. O God, always one and the same, grant that I may know myself, grant that I may know you. Each clause of the prayer depends on the preceding one. Knowing God comes through knowing oneself. Knowing oneself flows from divine grace. We could call divine grace divine mercy. In the Christian tradition, in fact, in all the great spiritual traditions of the world, the journey to God is a journey into the self, a journey of self-inquiry. Augustine famously says in the Confessions, "See, you were within and I was in the external world and sought you there. Novi foras ire," he says, "in te ipsum redi." Don't go out, return into yourself. One thinks of a poem attributed to Kabir, the great Sufi Hindu poet. Do not go to the garden of flowers. Oh, friend, go not there. In your body is the garden of flowers. Take your seat on the 1,000 petals of the lotus and there gaze on the infinite beauty. For Dante, too, to find God is to find oneself, one's true self, to truly know oneself, and not the mirage of pride. The comedy makes it very clear. For example, let's look at what he does with the word pome, apple, or fruit. Dante repeatedly represents the pilgrim's quest as a search for dolci pomi, for sweet fruit, for an apple. In Inferno 16, the pilgrim says, "Lascio lo fele, va per dolci pomi, promessi a me per lo verace duca." I leave bitterness behind and go towards the sweet fruits promised me by my truthful leader. When he reaches the curtain of fire that surrounds the Garden of Eden, the earthly paradise, the pilgrim balks until Virgil says that Beatrice is on the other side of the fire. And the pilgrim then plunges into the fire to cross into Eden, won over by Beatrice's name, come fanciul che vinto al pome, like a child won over by an apple, by a fruit. Adam lost Eden by seeking an apple outside himself on the branches of a tree. Dante regains it by seeking the apple, the sweetness, the nourishment, denoted by Beatrice's name. Once in Eden, on the threshold of meeting Beatrice, Virgil tells Dante that quel dolce pome che per tanti rami, cercando va la cura dei mortali, oggi porrà in pace le tue fami. That sweet fruit which mortals with so much effort go seeking on so many different branches shall today bring peace to all your cravings. We seek peace, fulfillment, ultimate joy, freedom, infinity in all kinds of things of the world, but we can't find it there. It's a beauty, a sweetness that may be manifest in the world, but it is not of the world. The pomo motif culminates in Paradiso 26, when the pilgrim comes face to face with Adam. The pilgrim is near the end of his journey, and he's just undergone the examination, or rather celebration, public manifestation and praise of the theological virtues perfected in himself. This is the fruition in him of faith, hope, and love. The theological virtues are transcendent, supernatural virtues. They come from the divine through grace, through mercy, and orient us to, conform us to our divine or supernatural end. The minute the exam on the theological virtues ends, we hear the Sanctus, holy, 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 and the pilgrim Dante finds himself face to face with Adam. And how does the pilgrim address Adam? O pomo che maturo solo prodotto fosti, O apple, fruit, who alone were brought forth ripe. Adam is himself the fruit that he saw outside himself, as if it were other than himself. Adam was himself the fruit of the garden of the world, and he thought it was out there in the world, something to seek through the senses, to devour. That is to have lost sight of our true nature, what we are. It is to be existentially alienated from ourselves. It's to lose Eden. Or rather, it's for the garden of the world, Eden, to become a harsh desert, a place of exile, which is how the pilgrim experiences it at the beginning of the poem. It all becomes even clearer when the pilgrim asks Adam what got him kicked out of Eden. Adam answers, "Or, figliol mio, non il gustar del legno fu per sé la cagion di tanto esilio, ma solamente il trapassar del segno. Now, my son, the tasting of the tree, the wood, was not in itself what caused the great exile, but only the trespassing of the sign, or boundary." Il trapassar del segno means not only trespassing a boundary, a limit, but also violating or transgressing a sign. The two are one. Through an eclipse of self-knowledge, of consciousness and love in himself, Adam disfigured himself as a sign or signifier of the divine. And that is to go beyond the limit, fruitlessly seeking more from the senses, from the world, from explanations than they can provide. Finite things cannot satiate the human instinct for infinity, no matter how much of the world one tries to devour through the senses. Nor can the world, or science, or explanation provide a resolution to the mystery of life. As the great philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein remarked, it's not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists. The facts all contribute only to setting the problem, not to its solution. Seeking the resolution of the mystery of life, ultimate peace and meaning and fulfillment from the world of the senses, is to bite into bitter wood, legno, not a sweet apple. This is the nature of all human seeking that is born from pride, that is, from the illusion of being an autonomous, self-sufficient thing, simply a finite self or ego. In fact, for those of you who know the comedy, legno, trapassar del segno, consciously evoke the mad flight of Ulysses in Inferno 26. And notice that here we're in Paradiso 26. These are not coincidences in Dante. Ulysses sought to figure out the mystery of life by exploring the world in the few days left to his senses, by doing a little more experimentation and thinking. The bitter wood of insatiable hunger and of Ulysses' futile quest for understanding is answered by the legno, the wood of the cross. Adam explains to Dante that at first he called the sommo bene, the supreme good, I. Later, God's name became El. In Italian, this is to go from calling God I to calling him he. It's to go from experiencing, and notice the I. It's to go from experiencing God as I, as the I of one's own I, as the ground and substance and source of one's own being, to conceiving God as other. This is a failure of self-knowledge, an alienation from the divine. The human I no longer denotes pure consciousness or love or being, the ground of all reality, but simply or only a finite sense of self. This is pride. When Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, what does that I refer to? The whole game is we need to find out. one can put this also in the language of sacrament, in particular, the Eucharist. We noted that Adam appears at the conclusion of the Sanctus. The Sanctus in the canon of the Mass introduces the Eucharist. Adam is himself the Eucharist, the ultimate sign or sacrament. A sacrament is a stable sign, redeemed from the flux of death and change, because it is a sign that participates in, that enacts the reality it denotes. In a sense, it is what it signifies. That is the nature of the human as it was created to be. In a created and redeemed Adam, as in Christ, the new Adam, it is pure awareness or being or love that says, I. The finite I knows it has no reality apart from, other than, that infinite self-subsistent I, or conscious act of being, that is the ground of all reality. In fulfilling the truth and potential of our nature and awakening to what we are and were made to be, we ourselves become the Eucharist. We both signify and share in the life of God. Our entire being and our language become praise, an expression of divine freedom and love. It's then God, Christ, who lives and acts and speaks through us. Another way of saying all this is that we fully come to know ourselves as created. Now, part of the power of the comedy and of medieval thought is that it grounds this profound understanding, not only in theology, but also in philosophy and in natural science. This integration of all disciplines in an ultimate vision of reality is a goal of Catholic thought and of Notre Dame. So let's look a bit at how Dante does it in the comedy. Dante's world picture looked basically like this. It's a picture he inherited from the ancient world from Aristotle and Ptolemy with some medieval refinements. You have the earth at the center, circled by 9 rotating heavens, the spheres containing all the planets and stars. Now, Aristotle, being a very, very smart guy, had said there could be nothing beyond the last heavenly sphere. There was literally nothing beyond the limit of the universe. No matter, no space, no void, no ether, nothing. Because if there were anything outside the universe, that would be part of the universe, obviously. Aristotle said that the only reality that was outside or beyond the universe in any sense was consciousness. He called it nous. The medieval term was intellectus. Consciousness is not a thing. It's a power of awareness that perceives and is all things. Awareness, mind, contains everything but is nothing in itself. Nous, Aristotle said, is nothing until it thinks. And when it thinks, it is what it thinks. That is the being of the world. The whole world is a projection within consciousness and has no existence apart from it. If you take consciousness away, the entire universe instantly vanishes. For Aristotle, this pure principle of nous, or mind, conceived in itself, was the ultimate ontological principle, the divine principle, grounding all reality, all perception, all being. Aristotle underlined that it was a reflexive principle because consciousness is aware of itself. Awareness is self-awareness. It's not a stretch to connect this profound insight with what the Lord told Moses when Moses asked, "Who shall I say sent me?" And God answered, "Tell them, I am sent me to you." That I am, the experience of pure awareness or being as the very foundation of all reality, is the ultimate ground and source of all authority. It's God. Dante very blandly calls, mind, the principle that is divinity in us. In fact, Aristotle's understanding became the foundation of medieval Christian thought, especially later medieval Christian thought. Now, note that by explaining things for the ancient and medieval world is not a matter so much of one event causing another, like a chain of events in time. It's more a question of coming to deeper ontological principle. What constitutes the being of something? What does it consist in? Aquinas observes, for example, that it makes very little difference whether the world always existed or whether it had some starting point. We know from Scripture, he says, that the world started to exist at a certain point, but that makes no real difference for the concept of creation. What counts is that the entire visible universe is dependent at every instant of its being on consciousness, being, what Aquinas calls pure intellect, or act, or esse, to be, the divine. This is what it means to say the world is created. It is radically contingent. At every instant that it exists, it's dependent on a manifestation of consciousness or love, a living act to be. This is to awaken to all of reality and one's own finite self as a gift, an ever new self-giving at every moment that it exists. The universe is alive, something God is doing at every instant. So it's intensely present, intensely real, continuous with our own reality. It's not, the universe is not, to quote Augustine again, a house that God built and left standing, which is the way it's almost always talked about. So the Christians adopted Aristotle's picture of the cosmos. But outside the cosmos, where Aristotle had put nous, they put the Imperium as a 10th heaven. In many theologians, the Imperium was a slightly messy notion, because it was the home of Christ and the angels and the blessed, sort of one with consciousness or being, light, love, but still sort of created and material. Rigorous thinkers like Aquinas had very little use for the Imperium. Dante adopted it, but he gave it true rigor. He thought it through. Dante completely identifies the Imperium with what Aristotle had put outside the limit of the world, God, or pure conscious being. So Dante's Imperium is quite different, radically different from that of the other thinkers of his time. It's uncreated, completely immaterial, not in space or time. It's completely identified with God, pure conscious being, light, love, the divine mind. And we can show this easily. In Paradiso 30, Dante leaves the outermost sphere, the primo mobile, to go into the Imperium. It goes beyond the limit of the world into the Imperium. As he enters the Imperium, Beatrice tells him, noi siamo usciti fuori dal maggior corpo al ciel che pura luce, luce intellettual piena d'amore, amor di vero ben pien di letizia, letizia che trascende ogni dolzore. We have issued forth from the greatest body, that's the primo mobile, the limit of the world, to the heaven which is pure light, the Imperium. Light intellectual, full of love, love of true good, full of joy, joy that transcends every sweetness. The primo mobile is the greatest body, the largest material thing, the limit of the world. The Imperium is pure intellectual light, the light of pure awareness or self-awareness. That reality, for Dante, is identical with love. That's his favorite word for it. And this is very important because awareness or consciousness is love. True love is not an emotion. It can trigger all kinds of emotions. Love is to recognize the other as oneself, as not other than oneself. And think about it. To the extent that you experience yourself as pure awareness or being, as the principle that gives being to all things, you experience all things as yourself, as one with your very existence. That is perfect love. It's also bliss and infinite sweetness, a complete surrender of the finite self into infinity and unlimited being. That Dante equates the Imperium with pure awareness or the divine mind is already clear when he first enters the Primo Mobile in Paradiso 27. Going into the Primo Mobile, Beatrice tells him, the nature of the universe, which holds the center still and moves all the rest around it, begins from here, the Primo Mobile, as from its starting point. And this heaven, the Primo Mobile, has no other where than the divine mind, in which is kindled the love that revolves it and the power that it rains down. Light and love enclose it in a circle as it does the others, and this enclosing he alone who girds it understands. So the Primo Mobile and the rest of the world within it has no where except the divine mind. The entire manifest universe depends on, is contained within consciousness. In the deepest sense, then, there's nothing that the world is made of. It's a self-experience of pure awareness or being. It's a radical notion, at least it seems so. So the divine mind that contains all things is love and light. Pure consciousness, we said, is a power of love, a power to experience itself as other, as finite reality. That is what love is. So when consciousness or being gives itself to finite experience, it sacrifices, in a sense, its freedom and infinity to become finite experience. The world comes into being. The entire universe is a self-sacrifice or movement of love on the part of the infinite. A voluntary self-giving. Only one who encompasses the Primo Mobile can understand how consciousness contains the world. It's not a question of explanations or concepts. One must experience oneself as pure awareness, love, being, in order to understand the true nature of space and time, to understand how the world depends on that reality. And this comes through love, through a radical surrender of self, in order to experience all as oneself. In these cantos of the Primo Mobile, Paradiso 27 through 29, right after meeting Adam, Dante meditates on time and space, what they are and how they relate to mind, to consciousness. He analyzes time in Paradiso 27, space in Paradiso 28, and then in Paradiso 29 he gives the culminating account of the creation of the world, on how the world arises from love, from God. And when all that is clear, all illusions dissolved, in Paradiso 30, right after that, Dante finds himself in the Imperium, in that consciousness or love that contains the world. He knows himself as that. He's now encompassed the world, in a sense. It's now inside him. I'm not going to go into all that here, but essentially, so how does the world arise from consciousness or being? There's not going to be a how in the sense of events or things. Because if you think a minute, you'll realize that any account of creation that mentions events or things is not an account of creation, but a description of the world. It can signify analogically or metaphorically, but it can't itself be an account of creation. All events or things are already part of the world, not about how it relates to the ground of its being. And in analogy, if we're thinking about just the phenomenon of consciousness in ourselves, how does a thought arise in mind? How does a dream arise in a dreaming intelligence? What is that? Aristotle said, again, consciousness is nothing until it thinks, and when it thinks, it is what it thinks. The fundamental point for Aristotle was that there's no intrinsic ultimate unit of time or space. There's no fundamental building block, no ultimate atoms or seconds that you make stuff out of. In that sense, there's nothing the spatio-temporal world is made of. Beatrice compares how the world arises in consciousness or in love to how mathematics arises from the number one. The number one, by giving rise to the concept of number, contains within itself all of mathematics. Mathematics is a tautological system already contained in germ within the concept of number itself. So how does the world arise from consciousness? There is no how. It arises as mathematics arises from the number one. And notice, mathematics adds nothing to the concept of number, to the number one, but unfolds its implications. The world adds nothing to the Imperium, but expresses or manifests its power or actuality. Space-time is contained within the I am of consciousness, as mathematics is contained in the number one. Now, there's a key moment in Paradiso 28 when Beatrice addresses the concept of space. The canto opens with an image of turning. Dante is looking into Beatrice's eyes, and he sees reflected in them a burning point, like a candle behind him. So he turns to look at that point directly. This is to turn from the reflection to the source, to turn one's attention away from the sensory world, what is outside, to focus one's sight, one's own awareness, inside, on itself, in a single point. This image of turning is a Neoplatonic emblem of contemplation, the mind turning on itself, turning its awareness on itself, to know itself fully. Again, as the ground of reality, ultimately. This is what true meditation is, the turning of awareness on itself. Focused on itself, consciousness comes to know itself as a dimensionless point of awareness, this I am, spawning all experience, all space and time. Dante's drawing here on a long contemplative tradition. Richard of St. Victor in the 12th century said, we need to bring the mind to a supreme point in its source in order to see the reality that spawns and is all things. St. Bonaventure in the 13th century says that through a peak of love and consciousness, the mind focuses itself in a single point and enters itself ultimately to pass over through that point into pure being, totally transferred and transformed into God. Bonaventure's words. Let's look at Dante's point in Paradiso 28. And my translation here I'll play a bit with what I'm showing you. When I turned around, my eyes were met. This is the moment he sees the light, the point in Beatrice's eyes, and turns to look at it directly. When I turned around, my eyes were met by what appears in that revolving sphere whenever one gazes intently on its circling. I saw a point that radiated light so piercing that the eyes on which it blazes are forced to shut from such piercing brightness. The star that, seen from here below, seems smallest, would seem a moon if put beside it, as when one star is set beside another. As near, perhaps, as a halo seems to be when it encircles the light that colors it, where the vapor that forms it is most dense. As close as that, a ring of fire whirled around this point at speed that would surpass the sphere that spins the swiftest round the world. This one was circled by a second one, the second by a third, and the third by a fourth, by a fifth the fourth, and by a sixth the fifth. The seventh followed, spreading out so wide that Juno's messenger, if made complete, would be too narrow to contain it. So too the eighth and ninth. It's like, okay, Dante, we get the point. And each of them revolved more slowly, according as it was in number farthest from the first. And that one, that ring closest to the blazing point of light, possessed the clearest flame because, I think, it intrudes itself the most in that point of light. My lady, who saw my eagerness and great suspense, said, "On that point depend the heavens and all of nature." These rings circling that burning point of light are orders of angelic intelligences. In Dante's cosmos, each heavenly sphere is turned by an order of angels in a hierarchy corresponding to the spheres themselves. Here, Dante is seeing the angelic intelligences directly in circles radiating out from a point. A point, a punto, is a mathematical term. It's dimensionless, infinitely small. Now, Beatrice's first words about the punto are, "Da quel punto dipende il cielo e tutta la natura." From that point depend the heavens and all of nature. Beatrice is quoting Aristotle, Metaphysics Lambda. It's the phrase Aristotle uses for, guess what? Nous. For consciousness, the ultimate ontological principle. He says, from such a principle depend the heavens and the world of nature. So Dante's made a complete identification here. How does the world depend on that point? Again, there is no how. And in fact, we get a sense of it here. The point projects space out from itself as a light source paints a halo onto mist. Think of the moon on a hazy night, where there's a ring around the moon. That ring has no being apart from that point of light from the moon. It's just projected by the moon. It's not self-subsistent. In the same way, the world has no being apart from consciousness. This is the point of self-awareness. And how does space arise from consciousness? As the sequence of integers arises from the number 1. And Dante has just run through all of them from 2 to 9. Now, Beatrice says of these circling rings of angelic intelligences, the closer a ring is to the punto, the point at the center, the more it intrudes itself in that source. That is, the more a finite intellect, angel or human, enters into itself, the more it knows itself as a dimensionless burning point of pure awareness, the more it is assimilated to God, to the ground of all reality. And Beatrice tells Dante, you're now in the smallest ring, closest to the point. Oh, of course, because in his journey, Dante is now in the primum mobile, right on the verge of going into the Imperium. And the largest sphere here, the primum mobile, closest to the Imperium, corresponds to the smallest ring closest to the burning point. The point is the Imperium. So you see what Dante has done. The image of the point in rings is simply an inverted image of the cosmos and the Imperium. Got that? So all of a sudden, we become aware that we can conceive Dante's journey to God in 2 ways. We can conceive it as traveling from the earth at the center of the cosmos out towards its outer limit, passing beyond that limit into the Imperium. That's union with God. This is to grow in love and understanding, to encompass more and more of the world as yourself until you know yourself as the pure being or awareness or love that contains and is all things. Or we can conceive it as a journey inside oneself, focusing one's awareness on itself until one experiences oneself as a pure burning point of I am, that as a ground and source, one with the ground and source of all that is. Notice that by turning around to see as Beatrice does at the beginning of Paradiso 28, Dante has shifted from one perspective to the other. In the reflected or projected image that we normally live in, matter and the earth is at the center, and God and consciousness is at the periphery. After turning around to see as Beatrice does, that's inverted. Dante experiences God or consciousness in himself as the center, and the world, space-time, as a radiated projection from that source. Now, all of this is consolidated then in a wonderful way in Paradiso 29, and I won't tackle that here. But I want to make some final observations. We saw that Dante's theology, philosophy, and science are all integrated, so that in his understanding of the world, it makes sense to say that to truly know oneself is to know God and all of reality. Can we make that same integration? Since Father Zahm was a scientist as well as a lover of Dante, and just a few months ago we confirmed again Einstein's theory of general relativity, and Notre Dame believes that all branches of knowledge are ultimately integrated, I'd like to close here with just some reflections on whether Dante's understanding can be reconciled with our scientific notions. Obviously, in grosso modo, in a rough way. I think there's some intriguing correspondences between this understanding that we've laid out and affirmations by modern physicists. One thing that Aristotle lucidly understood is that any naive notion of matter can't sustain analysis. Any attempt to say what matter is in itself is simply a description of a form that matter has assumed. Aristotle concluded that matter in itself is nothing and has no being apart from form, which for him is consciousness. In fact, materialism has always rested, all the way back to Democritus and Leucippus, on some notion of an ultimate building block, something you can make the world out of, something irreducible. That used to be atoms. But atoms have blown up on us. We're up to over 50 subatomic particles now, along with force particles and antiparticles, and there's no theoretical limit to how many particles there can be. And all particles are waves, and all waves and forces are particles, and all particles can be transmuted into other particles, and all mass is interchangeable with energy. That kind of dissolves the notion that matter consists in something material, as Aristotle saw 2,300 years ago. We've also come to realize, to quote the physicist Heinz Pagels, that everything that ever existed or can exist is already potentially there in the nothingness of space. This means that matter and the vacuum can be transmuted into each other, a fact that he himself says, well, it's kind of like creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. And he says, physicists are now studying nothing at all, the vacuum, but that vacuum contains all of being, because any point in the vacuum can be given an energy to generate manifestation form. A Canadian physicist, Mir Faisal, has recently said that properly understood, the cosmos came into being from nothing and remains nothing. He says something didn't come from nothing. The universe is still nothing. It's a more elegantly ordered nothing. That's actually a very profound, from the physical point of view, it's also incredible stuff. Now, what science has not probed is the convertibility or relation between energy or the vacuum and consciousness. Nous, what Aristotle called nous. And that is to be expected. As the great 20th century philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein observed, the visual field, what is seen, does not include the eye itself. The ultimate subject of experience, what is doing the experiencing, consciousness itself, alone is absent from every description of experience. Nothing can be said about that subject. It is nothing. It is outside the world, as Aristotle too said. But one of the most revolutionary developments of modern physics is that you can't leave consciousness out of any account of reality. Every description of reality is in part determined by the act of observation itself. So there is no such thing as the world in itself apart from consciousness. It's striking that the greatest architects of quantum mechanics, of modern physics, sought to reverse the idea that consciousness depends on matter. They said it was the other way around. Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Max Planck, for example, they all concluded that the world coincides with consciousness, but consciousness is the fundamental principle or ground, through or in which the world has being. Max Planck, in fact, said that the true I, the I awareness, the true ultimate subject of experience, is independent from the whole chain of natural causality, and he calls it a point. One single point in the immeasurable world of mind and matter. Also relevant is non-locality. The fact that two entangled phenomena separated by distance can affect each other simultaneously. This is a consequence of quantum mechanics that John Bell predicted in 1964, and it's been repeatedly confirmed, most recently, virtually conclusively at Delft. The very notion of locality, of position, distance, separation, is in some sense illusory. Reality is ultimately one and ultimately dimensionless, as in a point of consciousness, or, analogously, as the parts of a dream world. Now this is the truth, the experience that Dante portrays himself as awakening to, and that he seeks to awaken in us. Pure awareness, love. Love itself is the omnipresent, indivisible, dimensionless reality in which the world consists. But conscious being is completely free, unbound by time, space, motion, death. It's a dimensionless point. It's an all-encompassing reality. It's everything, and it is nothing. It is infinite power, infinite love, infinite being, infinite bliss, infinite self-giving. It's a blade of grass. It's a suffering child. It's the Himalayas. It's a frightened, cornered mouse. To know oneself as that, not other than that, is to reach the goal of the Divine Comedy, what medieval theologians called union with God, or deificatio, deification. But how does one actually come to know oneself as that reality? As not other than that reality. Not through philosophical or scientific explanations, though they have a role. Not through lectures like this, though they can have a role. Through the sacraments, through the Eucharist, through which we are what we see and we receive what we are, as Augustine says. The sacraments can only exist if the entire world is a sacrament. And by preparing for the Eucharist through Lent. Because this ultimate awakening or understanding is not something we can do for ourselves. We can only prepare the way, make straight the way of the Lord, empty ourselves like Mary so that Christ can be born in us, through us. We can seek to purify ourselves, to repent, to surrender, to sacrifice our finite attachments and desires, to forgive radically and unconditionally, to bear all joy and sorrow with stillness and equanimity, to treat everyone and everything with equal love, to do all our work as an offering, seeking no reward from it, to serve all anonymously and joyously, with no expectation of outcome or acknowledgement. We can seek to burn with love and longing for the unveiling of that reality, to love God, love beauty, truth, infinity, more than we love the world, more than we love our finite selves, more than we love our mortal bodies. We can seek to constantly bring the mind back to its source, to still it in the infinite ocean from which it arises, with the persistent, focused self-inquiry, who am I? The pilgrim Dante does all this. But ultimately, of course, to do all this, what's required is the radical, even if gradual, surrender of what thinks it is doing all this. The sacrifice of the very sense of finite agent or self, our sense of being an autonomous doer. Only the higher nature in us, the divine in us, can effect that surrender, can take over, subsume our own sense of self, or even control the lower self and its impulses. Only the higher nature can kill the illusion of an autonomous, self-sufficient, finite self, our pride or ego. That's why we need to constantly turn back in love, in gratitude, in longing, in hope, towards that higher nature, towards the infinite divine mercy, praying with St. Augustine, Deus semper idem, naurim me, naurim te.